Again, we have Jill Waity from UNCW, Sarah Daniels from the Cape Fear Food Council. We have Beth Gaglione from the Food Bank of Central and Eastern North Carolina. And we have Cara Stretch from Feast Down East. We really appreciate you guys joining Port City Daily today. And I know from our community, we really appreciate what y'all are doing. First, we'll go with Jill. Why don't you describe to us what is a food desert?
Not an easy question to answer. So the USDA defines a food desert in a certain way, right? So if you live a mile from a grocery store, if you're in a census tract where a certain number of people are in poverty, that might be considered a food desert. So there's that definition, but then individuals might feel like they live in a food desert if they lack access to transportation. And they don't have, if the bus system isn't good. So there's different ways that individuals might interpret that, although there is like one specific definition of what a food desert is.
And Sarah, I like how you described your work with the Cape Fear Food Council. It seems like it's given you a bird's eye perspective, what's gone on the past few months, your role in collaborating with different agencies and nonprofits. Can you speak to some of the trends that you've seen in relation particularly to food insecurity within these so-called food deserts?
Absolutely. What we're seeing is that food insecurity is a chronic issue in our community, even when we're not facing a pandemic or an economic recession, and that the current conditions are exacerbating existing food insecurity and also creating food insecurity in households that might not have had that issue before. And so obviously, as the need increases across the community, the challenges are how to, again, collaboratively and as efficiently as possible, mobilize the resources that we have at our disposal, as a collective group of food assistance providers and partners. And we know that right now, as Beth has mentioned and can illuminate further, that the food bank, is suffering from lack of their normal streams of donations and other sources of food. And we know that that's true also for farmers, so across the food supply chain. So responding to the increased demand is getting more difficult as well. And so the need is going up and the challenges are also increasing.
And Jill, you had mentioned, just across the nation, you've seen farmers getting rid of their crops because they have no purchasers on that end of the market, and USDA's eventual involvement. Can you kind of elaborate on that again?
Yeah, so Beth might be able to get at this a little bit better, but so farmers didn't have anywhere to sell some of their stuff, so they were like plowing under crops, dumping milk, getting rid of eggs, because they didn't have any restaurant buyers or other buyers. So then what I believe happened is eventually, maybe 4 or 5 weeks after this started, that's when the USDA came in, bought that, and then they were trying to distribute out to people like food banks. Is that right, Beth?
So they're calling the program CFAP, Commodities for, I always forget what the ACE, Assistance for Individuals in Poverty. I think it's something of that nature. And Jill is exactly right. So for weeks and weeks, Sarah, myself, others in the community were getting calls from food distributors that were desperate to find a place, a home for their food. And as much as they would have liked to donate it to food banks and Feast Down East and anyone who would be willing to distribute it, they were struggling with the loss that they would take on that product. And so the USDA stepped in, and for the most part, food banks and other food distributors to low-income individuals have become the place where, we're now their customer. So they're still the vendor. They're still working with the farmers. They're still working with whoever they traditionally purchased food from. But instead of distributing it to schools and restaurants, which are their primary customers, the USDA has stepped in and made that food available to food banks. I will say it's not easy, just like it's not easy for a grocery store to change the way that they work, maybe directly with a farmer to take in product. Usually they're working with some kind of a distribution center that the farmer works with. It hasn't been easy to figure out a way to work with these different vendors. And so they've had to make shifts. We've had to make some pretty significant shifts in order to be able to take this food in. A lot of communication with our partner agencies to make sure that they can handle the volume and the frequency for how often they need to take in this food in order to be eligible for it. So it was a lot of sort of logistical detail there, but it's been a challenge, but it's wonderful food.
And speaking of logistical challenges, I know, Cara, we had discussed yesterday some of the people that are falling through the cracks are also the most vulnerable people in our population in terms of their risk of contracting COVID-19. Can you speak to a little bit on particularly low-income elderly folks and what they're experiencing in the past few months?
Yeah, sure. So, something that always strikes me when we talk about this is that our low-income seniors suffer from an inability to access food on a regular basis. It's tough for them to use public transportation to get groceries. If you imagine someone elderly trying to haul a week's worth of groceries on the bus or by walking long distances. So on a normal day, it's complicated and difficult. And so that was one of our primary customer tends to be seniors in the sites that we go to with our mobile market. And so when COVID closures started to happen, our concern very quickly became for those folks that we already knew struggled to get food. A lot of our seniors have health issues. They have physical issues that prevent them from being able to walk to the grocery store or go through a grocery store, and they're at higher risk of contracting and suffering greatly from COVID. So so the delivery of free food bags to them was really important to us. And they were all extremely grateful and very welcoming, although keeping their safe distance from us.
And can you speak to the challenge, and this could be you as well, Sarah, a lot of times you go to these food banks and it comes packaged in boxes and cans, often not to the point that's made easy for elderly people to cook their own dinners. Does that highlight some of the logistical challenges as well, on top of having to go on public transportation to get to these grocery stores?
Yeah, I mean, I would imagine that yes, that's true. And one of the things we were worried about as an organization was we were delivering a lot of fresh produce that required cooking. And one of the things that we talked about quite a few times on the food access calls to the Cape Fear Food Council was, is there a need for prepared food to go to these folks that may struggle with preparing food themselves? We didn't get a lot of traction with that. I know that part of it was logistical because we had some folks that were willing to prepare the food for us, and funding, you have to move very, very quickly, and I don't think things moved as fast as we needed them to. But yes, I do think that preparing food on a regular basis is tough for a lot of the seniors that we work with. But they still seemed very grateful for the food that was delivered, and I'm sure they put it to great use. I'm sure Beth and Sarah could fill in a little bit more on that, on the prepared food side.
soon after, COVID really became a reality for most people. And that was, our community responded very quickly to the needs of children in our community. I don't want to use the word overwhelmingly. There's never too much. But it was a disappointment to me, and I think to many of us on the Food Council, that recognized quickly that although children are an extraordinarily vulnerable population and they need some of the same assistance that seniors do, there wasn't that natural population stepping up and saying, I'm going to do whether it's a company or a school system or you name it, we're going to do that for our senior population. I mean, there is a senior resource center in New Hanover County, and they utilized all the resources at their disposal to do what they could do, which was significant. But it seemed like the immediate response of our community was very, very heavily focused on children. And again, that was fantastic. But there didn't seem to be a really strong coming together for seniors in our community in any significant way. And we talked about that a lot on the Cape Fear Food Council calls.
I just wanted to add real quickly to that, something that I think we, as a group, we take for granted that the immunocompromised kind of fit in. We tend to group them in with seniors, but I just want to point out that the immunocompromised population is all ages. And I do feel like that's a population of folks that we have not talked about enough to make sure that they also had access to food in a safe way.
So you're talking about perhaps a 40, 50-year-old who has heart problems.
Or 20-year-old, but yeah.
20-year-old,
or
yeah.
Diabetes, and there's a lot of underlying conditions that could exist.
One population that I think was identified very quickly and addressed very quickly that was falling through the cracks were children who did not have parents or a parent with a car that could go and pick up the school lunches and breakfasts that were being prepared by the school district. That was addressed fairly quickly. I think the verdict is still out about how each school district in our community, whether they did it well, because school buses were rolling, and I understand that they will roll all summer for those meals to get out to children without transportation, but was definitely an issue that came up pretty quickly for those falling through the cracks.
And can we speak on some other groups that y'all have noticed who perhaps there aren't programs yet or as much attention needed to address their own food insecurity needs?
I think similar to Cara's comment about folks who are immunocompromised, we also need to think about folks who have disabilities, whether mental or physical. And of course, those are individuals of all ages. And there are a lot of situations where folks who have some kind of a severe disability or significant disability are reliant on a caretaker, sometimes for food preparation or for grocery shopping or all of the above. And that can become an additional burden on a caretaker, especially if that person is either still holding down a job or, for example, has been unemployed, the financial strain as well. The other thing that's important, I think, for reaching folks in that category is that there are also people who are living with disabilities who don't have a caretaker with them and are semi-independent or reliant on a public service or multiple public services. And being able to intervene to know where they were relying on some kind of support, but maybe don't have that right now for some reason, being able to identify and find those folks and meet that need in the meantime is really critical, but it's especially hard to identify where those folks are, where the needs are, where the services have dropped off that would have normally stepped in. So those hard to reach groups are in particular hard to identify and to serve.
And Sarah, I think you discussed somewhat innovative ways that you are employing to try to identify where those people are through geomapping and things of that nature. Can you elaborate on that?
Absolutely. We are using a mass texting system that allows us to target a particular audience, both geographically and by certain demographic categories. And so we were able to first look at people who live within New Hanover County. And then we also started with a group of folks whose household income annually is under 30,000. So we know that folks who are financially insecure are very vulnerable to being food insecure. And so we were able to mass text large numbers of people, thousands of people, and directly ask them, are you having a hard time putting food on the table? And do you need information about food assistance? And the response was quite high. Normally these kinds of texting things, whether it's for voting or other mass texting efforts, usually response rates around 5%. And we've actually had about a 15% response rate on this question. So it's clear that the need is pressing enough and there are enough folks who are concerned about it that they're responding to strangers texting them and offering them assistance via text messages. And the vast majority of people who have taken us up on that assistance are incredibly grateful and seem to be very, very appreciative of the information and of somebody reaching out directly to them to provide that.
Mark, I'll mention two other populations that come to our attention. One that I recognized through food bank or Cape Fear Food Council conversations come through loud and clear, and the other, some of the work that we do at the food bank. The first is the Latinx community. We had a significantly committed individual, Amanda Boomershine, who attended all of our weekly meetings and always brought to light the need to make sure everything that we put out was in English and Spanish, and not just us, but everything that was being put out about food assistance related to COVID-19. But she also brought up this issue with us, and it's something we've discussed a little bit about the food bank, and that is the hesitation that individuals may have to come out and seek food assistance that they've never sought before. And so the political climate that we live in right now, it's understandable why someone in that population whose status may not be what they feel like it needs to be to get the kind of assistance that we're offering. And it's an issue that we face at the food bank. And, there have been years in the past 4 that have been more challenging than others where the fear is heightened. But COVID-19 brings that all right back, right? It's like I feel the need to go out and ask, but I'm sensitive about going places that I've never been, meeting people I've never met who are offering the kind of assistance that's being offered. Secondarily, I'll mention that we are seeing, as well as our partner agencies are seeing, this isn't really, I guess you could say this is a population that falls through the cracks because people who are newly unemployed or will be, are temporarily unemployed, have not had to seek this kind of assistance with food, maybe ever. We've met people at our food distributions at our partner agencies that have said, I have never had to come for support, but I don't know when my place of work will reopen. It's just so many unanswered questions about when things will go back to quote unquote normal for them in terms of their work life. And so a lot of newly unemployed people. We met a gentleman at one of our partner agencies that said, 65 years old. He said, I haven't been without a job since I was 8 years old. And it is hard for them to come forward and ask for the kind of help that they need right now. So we've seen enormous increases in requests for support with food stamp applications at the food bank, to the degree that we've had to pull many staff off of what they normally do in working in the community to help with those sorts of efforts.
So my next question is more of a food supply oriented question. Let's say someone in a low income neighborhood walks to their bus stop, takes a bus ride. Where are they going? What do they find when they get there in terms of perhaps produce that is not, there's not as much supply of that or meat once they get there. Can you walk me through that and what's been occurring the past few months?
So, I mean, it depends on the area, right? So the closest grocery store might be pretty far. So not only is the logistical challenges we were talking about getting to the grocery store and the way that the bus routes run, so they usually only run in one direction, right? So it might take them just a short amount of time to get to the grocery store. Then they have to ride the bus all the way around to get back to their house. But they might not, I mean, if you're talking about what's going on now, someone on one of our food assistance calls was talking about how she saw someone looking specifically for something at a store. I think it was toilet paper. And she had taken it, this woman had taken a cab to get there, and they didn't have what she wanted, so she had to go take the cab back, right? So she spent however much it cost there and back. So while it might be an inconvenience for some of us, if they're out of meat or the produce that we want, for those who are low income, it might really impact their ability to buy the groceries that they need.
Communication that we're getting from our grocery store partners, and we have a sort of unique relationship with one of them that allows our partner agencies to purchase items in bulk that we don't carry at the food bank. So, I mean, when you walk into the food bank, it's not like Costco, right? We don't have a section for beans and a section for tomatoes. We have the food that has been donated to us over the past month. So there are items that our partner agencies like to have in every bag that they distribute. They're not going to distribute spaghetti sauce if they don't have pasta or some kind of a noodle, but something to make a meal with, or at least most of our partners, that's how they operate. And so the relationship that we have with the one grocery store that does allow us to do some bulk purchasing on behalf of partner agencies that have the resources to do that, that has been shut down for about 4 weeks because they don't have the quantity of product to be able to do those sort of extra things. I mean, I see the shortages in certain items when I go to the store, just because I'm sort of paying attention, because I want to see those shelves filled, because until we get to the point where they can get all of their quantity inventory on a regular basis, we won't be able to go back to having that relationship. So I have, I mean, I think we've all seen the shortages in meat and produce at the stores. There very rarely is a time that you would go to the grocery store and not see sort of that standard vegetable that's always there, like broccoli. You know, it's just always there. So it is strange to go to the store and see some of those items unavailable. And it really just is a matter of the supply chain for the grocery stores being so difficult right now. When they can't get it, it's a sure signal that you know, others of us who are trying to access food for other reasons are having major difficulties accessing some of those items. I don't know if I've addressed your question as directly as you'd hoped, but you know, the word that I hear from our folks in our food resources team is that there will be items that we can very traditionally access throughout the course of the year that are going to be very hard for us to access probably for the next 12 months.
And what items in particular are you talking about?
Meat is the primary item. Our grocery stores are really great about donating meat back to the food bank that is of any, you know, in excess. In other words, it's going close to code and they know that we can move it very quickly. But also meat from distributors like, you know, Tyson and Smithfield and Butterball that traditionally just make a habit of donating meat to us. So meat is probably the primary item, but the other items that we're having some challenges getting are the shelf-stable product. We had to make a pretty quick shift away from our plan to distribute a high volume of shelf-stable product because it just wasn't available for purchase, and it certainly was not in the donation chain either. there was when Feast Down East had put out word that they were going to be distributing produce from local farmers to seniors, we very much wanted to supply Feast Down East with boxes of some shelf-stable items that would complement the produce, and we just didn't have the supply to do it. And it's been a long time that we've had to be so strict in our distribution methods, because we have to remember that we have 100 partners that rely on us for some quantity of food on a regular basis. And so to go outside of our traditional partners, it's been tough. I think we're just now with the CFAT product getting to the point where we can do that.
And what about produce, especially with, perhaps a demographic that produce and meat are expensive? How's that changed with produce, the supply of produce, and how does that relate to, these food deserts, people who are buying food that are in a lower income and harder to access quality, healthy food options?
I mean, I think that's one of the things that we wanted to address very quickly when it was clear that COVID was going to become a problem. When we closed down our mobile markets, we were really nervous that we were cutting off a very small stream, but a stream nonetheless, of fresh, nutritious food, which is why we pivoted to the food bags, because we just felt like it was so important that we continue to support our local farmers who were selling through our mobile market and to restaurants that were now closed, but also to make sure that the people that already struggled to access fresh, nutritious food had some source of it coming in. So while, I think our peak week, we had 287 food bags delivered, it's not enough, but it made some impact. I mean, I personally feel very strongly that fresh, nutritious food is something that most people suffer from access or education about. And especially when we're talking about seniors and kids, I just feel like that's a topic that I hope what we've just gone through will push along and push deeper, so that we're talking more about how important it is to feed people food that nourishes them and helps them heal and helps them learn and grow.
In terms of food insecurity, and as this pandemic further changes our entire economy, what do you see in terms of how you address food insecurity? How's that going to change once the dust settles here?
Well, I hope that it's drawing attention to this issue. I mean, I know we talked about what a great job that people in our community did with addressing the childhood hunger. But I think probably the average person doesn't realize how many young kids get at least 2 meals a day every day from their schools, right? So kind of thinking about this, thinking about how we can increase some of the federal funding towards programs like SNAP would be really important, right? It's like Pandemic SNAP or something right now, right? The food stamp program, but kind of thinking about that. And one thing that happened, I did some research after the impact of the recession in 2008. It was so long lasting. So I was interviewing people who worked at food banks in 2012, and they were still having these impacts. So I think it's really important for us to realize that even once this is like over, once they develop a vaccine and everything, there's going to be these ripple effects with the economy, and food insecurity is going to stay high for forever, right? So I think this year was the first year that the food insecurity rate finally dipped below the rate right before the recession in 2008, right? So, and now it's like going to be back up again. So it's going to be really long term. I just want people to remember like that when it's over, it's not really over, and this is going to have ripple effects forever. So anyway.
And I think one example of what Jill is talking about from those of us who work in emergency food every day is that we were still responding to Hurricane Florence at the time that COVID came on the scene. And at the time that Florence hit, we were still responding to Hurricane Matthew. So we had different pockets of need. Matthew hit our Columbus County, very hard. And then Florence didn't have as much of an impact on Columbus as it did on Pender, Brunswick, and New Hanover. And, that's the whole of our service areas, those 4 counties. So trying to respond to Columbus County's devastation from Matthew, and then continuing to respond to the significant impacts that Florence made on so many of our families. And then this, that has really left, I think, almost no one unscathed in so many ways, but just so much job loss, so many people who are furloughed. And that takes a long time to recover from, whether it's 6 weeks of no work or 8 weeks of no work or 12 weeks of no work or less work. When you're trying to live on $25,000 a year and trying to feed 4 people, that is not easy to recover from. And so it will have long-lasting impact on families, for sure.
And to shift it a little bit too, sorry, Sarah. What we see with our farmers, and this is kind of along with what Beth was saying in recovery, a lot of our farmers looked forward to this year as their first year of solid sales after Florence. Because I don't think people realize that, Florence hit in the fall of, oh my gosh, what year is it? 18? And so that impacted their ability to grow for all of 19, really. And then we experienced a drought, and we experienced Dorian. So this was really their year to kind of come back. And so when COVID first hit, I talked to several of our farmers who were in a complete panic, because what Beth described is, they live off of $25,000, $30,000 a year, and they're feeding a family, and they're keeping up with the farm and property, and buying crops, and it's just, there's so much that goes into farming, and it's expensive, and they don't make a lot, and so I again, this is another point where I feel like farmers are another group of folks that are going to continue to struggle past this. And in some of the struggles, it might be positive. Like, some of our farmers are concerned about demand once restaurants start to open up again. And I am all for them being concerned about that. Let's figure out how to make that work and grow your business. But at the same time, it's overwhelming, and it adds another level of fear for the farming industry, for the small farming industry again.
And I think that whether you're talking about on the production side with farmers or on the consumer side with food insecurity, that what we're seeing right now is a heightened awareness of underlying disparities in our community, and that more people are engaging in conversations about, we're having to put Band-Aids on these things right now, and that's important. That's critical for us to be doing that. But that long-term, what we really need to do is step back and evaluate the conditions that are creating these vulnerabilities. And that more conversations are needed around supporting small farm businesses and restructuring our agriculture at the federal level to make it a more fair game. Or looking at, in the Wilmington community in particular, racial disparities. Public health experts in our community are doing a great job of highlighting the fact that COVID is disproportionately affecting Black individuals across the country. And so we know that when folks are low income and have other risk factors, that food insecurity is a contributing factor that can make people more vulnerable to a virus or add stress to their overall situation. And so if we're going to really proactively alleviate these conditions in our community, we need to fundamentally reevaluate, again, some of these social and economic structures that food insecurity is really a symptom of.
And I'll just echo what Sarah said and what Jill said too, and give you a sort of real world example. I had mentioned that when we saw our food stamp, our requests for support for food stamp applications or SNAP applications increasing so dramatically, our first, at the food bank, our first, it was a knee-jerk reaction. You do what you have to do to shift resources from one place to another. And so we have 2 people on our staff who travel our 34 county area doing nutrition education. And, you know, the idea is that we want to encourage people to eat more fresh food so that they can have a healthier lifestyle and hopefully deal with some of these comorbidities and the things that really make them vulnerable to things like COVID, right? So it's, you know, it all ties together. And so because they couldn't go out in the community and serve the community in the traditional way that they normally do, you know, they are working on food stamp applications. We also know that now that some of the food chain supply issues are calming a little bit, we are going to see an enormous amount of food coming our way at food banks, an enormous amount of fresh food coming from farms. You know, and this is, we like to say, well, that's a good problem to have. We'll figure out how to do it. But we're doing it at the expense. This is me talking. I try to reflect the food bank's opinions as often as I can. But I think most of my colleagues in the food banking community would agree that when we take our eyes off of the things that we hope someday will shorten the lines at emergency food systems, at emergency food centers, when we take our eye off of that, and have to focus so much on the logistics of food delivery, it does impact our ability to sort of move the needle on the things that Sarah's talking about and the things that Jill talked about. So we want to be working on solutions. We want to work it on, you know, bettering the community and coming to figure out a way where food banks can no longer exist. We want to solve hunger. But if we're dealing with these disasters of, you know, hurricanes and COVID and really just focusing all of our energy on pushing out more and more food because there are more and more people who are food insecure, we're not getting to the root cause, and we're not able to do our work that's so important in the community and the things that we talk about at the Cape Fear Food Council. And when we talk about access to food, we're not solving those problems. We're just, like Sarah said, we're just continuing to put a Band-Aid on those things.
And once all that food hits the market all at once, a huge solution that needs to be figured out is how to efficiently and effectively send it to the people who are in most need, correct?
Absolutely. You don't want to just keep pushing food to the same populations every day. We do need to figure out how to be creative, and make sure that our senior needs are met, and make sure that those without transportation are met, and make sure that our immune compromised folks and Latinx community and the whole, and it's hard. It's a lot of work, but we're committed to doing that.
Well, thank you all so much for joining today. It was very enlightening, especially coming from people who are, you know, on the front lines of figuring out these solutions.
Thanks for having us. We appreciate it, Mark.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.